Hey guys, this is Miss Vinian with Flip Video 1 with Reconstruction. We're going to be talking about what impact did the Civil War leave on America. So we're going to talk about the period right after the Civil War. These are our 3 learning targets that we're going to be covering during this video 1 and 2. All right, so the Civil War was, remember, the North versus the South, and the Southern states seceded from the Union over the matter of slavery and states' rights, mainly. The Union will prevail after much back and forth. You should have gone over that in 8th grade, and the process of putting the country back together is going to cause a lot of tension between the different races and between the North and South. We call this period of time the Reconstruction era, and it ends in 1877. So you can write down 1865 to 1877 as the years of Reconstruction. These are all the states that were under Reconstruction that had to be admitted back into the Union, and you can see Tennessee is the first one that is admitted back. And these different colors tell you who was controlling what. The North had put military in the states to kind of keep them in order. Once the military pulls them out, it will no longer be Reconstruction. And we'll talk about that in class. So some progressive things that have happened after the Civil War was the 13th Amendment, which banned slavery. And so it freed all the slaves. And that was following the Emancipation Proclamation that you've probably heard of. And so then we have the 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment gives citizenship to all people born or naturalized within the U.S. So this is going to give African Americans citizenship, but you can see it does not give citizenship to Native Americans. And so these are really progressive things that are going on for African Americans. They get freedom and then they get citizenship. Some not good things that were happening at the time, and this goes directly with the 14th Amendment, states were passing laws that limited the freedoms of African Americans. So specifically one called the Black Codes forced African Americans to work on farms or as servants, and it also kept them from intermarrying, holding public meetings, owning guns, getting jobs, all sorts of things that basically kept them from succeeding economically. This is laws from one of the state's Black Codes, and if you look right here, it says that there's no intermarrying or no interrelationships, and it actually finds the white person more than it does the African American, trying to teach the white people a lesson, and I'm doing that in quotes because obviously to us today that's ludicrous. These are clicker questions that I'll be asking you in class, so feel free to write them down in the answers so you're prepared for the quiz. Also, even though we're about to get to the 5th Amendment and African Americans, 15th Amendment, sorry, and the African Americans get the right to vote, other laws were passed to keep them from voting in the South. And so these were called literacy tests, poll taxes, and the only people that were exempt were those that they said were under grandfather clause. So if a person could only vote if their grandfather had voted before 1860, and the only people who had voted before 1860 had been white people. So this excludes African Americans. Okay, so there's a group of people called the Radical Republicans that are in office, and they're angered by the Black Codes, and they want to punish the South because the South is putting these laws in, even though the federal government is trying to basically help African Americans succeed. And so there's there's Radical Republicans on the side of African Americans. Okay, make sure you know what the 14th Amendment is. All right, that brings us to the 15th Amendment, and 15th Amendment is it gives African American men the right to vote, and many women's rights activists were really angry about this because it didn't give women the right to vote. Make sure you know the amendment that women got the right to vote and what year, and you can get some extra stamps in class. So all of this progress happened, and then we have progress stalled, the Black Codes, and then also the Ku Klux Klan. In 1866, a group of white Southerners created the Ku Klux Klan, and it's just a secret society that is opposed to African Americans obtaining civil rights, in particular the right to vote. The KKK used violence and intimidation to frighten blacks. They also wore white robes and hoods to hide their identities. The Klan was known to have also murdered a lot of people. So there's a Klan in the 1860s and then a resurgence of the Klan in the 1920s that will be a little bit different. And this Klan covers their face up, where the Klan in the 1920s won't cover their face up. And extra stamps to whoever can come in and tell me why the KKK burned crosses at night on the lawns of African Americans. All right. So some African American legislators in Tennessee, there's 14 African Americans voted into the General Assembly, which is huge progress. And they were all former slaves. But by 1887, there's none left. Like nobody else would be elected until the 1950s. So this is going to show you a trend that right after the Civil War, African Americans had a lot of freedoms. But by 1880s, where did their freedoms go? Basically, the South is going to gain control again from those military districts, and they're going to put laws that will pretty much oppress African Americans. These are the first African American senators into Congress. Some other things that stall the African American progress are the segregation and Jim Crow laws. Blacks had to stay in separate hotels, and this is basically where segregation comes down. Everything was segregated: schools, libraries, restaurants, bathrooms, everything. So make sure you get that definition of segregation, and we will talk about the actual Jim Crow, what Jim Crow was in class. Something else that stalled was Plessy v. Ferguson, which was the Supreme Court case that ruled that segregation was legal, and this is one of the most important court cases. I would highlight this sucker over and over again because this is, out of all of history, this is going to be one of the most important ones. And basically it says that segregation is legal as long as things are, as long as it's separate but equal. And we all know that back then the facilities that were separate were not equal, and African Americans did not get the same facilities as white people. It would take until 1965, 100 years after the Civil War ended, for Jim Crow laws to be outlawed and blacks to finally realize legal equality in America. That's all for today, so make sure you have all your Cornell notes, and this is Reconstruction Part 1. See you guys in class!